Star-Lord, Master of the Sun, just dropped, and he seems pretty good. Star-Lord is a 4/5 with an on reveal that looks at the amount of turns you've ended with unspent energy, gives him 1 power for each of them, and then gives you 5 energy. 1 energy, not 5. Definitely not 5. He definitely doesn't give you 5 energy. He gives you 1 energy for each turn you've ended with unspent energy, which just so happens to be 5 energy a lot of the time you play him. This means that, in general, he leans toward a type of Marvel snap that is a simultaneously very powerful turn 6 and sometimes very telegraphed turn 5. What that means is this is a card that is almost always being played on turn 5, and it is almost always being done to facilitate something ridiculous on turn 6. The times when it's not being played on turn 5, it is being played earlier only because you are going to reactivate its effect later in the game, usually on turn 5. So, for example, sometimes you'll play it on 4 and then Grandmaster it. Much like Show Lao, this is a Season Pass card that is about doubling itself. Grandmaster, Absorbing Man, and Symbiote Spider-Man are very common cards that you're going to see with this effect. Doubling the amount of energy you get is an incredibly powerful way to make sure that you are doing something extremely powerful late in the game. This is also a card that I think is going to feel a lot stronger right now than he will in 2 weeks, because right now, people aren't going to understand exactly what it is that you are doing. There are multiple decks on this list that I think are keying off of their own surprise value and not necessarily going to hold up in the long term. But for right now, as long as people don't understand what's going on and don't understand that they should be leaving, you will be able to rack up big wins. I just would be wary of people promoting their decks as if that is continually going to happen. These are definitely decks that are benefiting from people not understanding how to play against this card and not understanding what they need to do when the combo actually happens. And yes, this is a combo card. This is a card that is built to do something quite ridiculous, and you often want to take that something quite ridiculous and multiply it as many times as you possibly can. So let's take a look at the decks people are playing with this card and then go into what we think is going to actually stick around. As much as I hate it, I do think that we probably have to start here. This is the biggest difference between this current metagame and the previous metagame, is that you'll run into people doing this kind of thing. I think a lot of the other decks that this guy goes in are decks that already existed, right? Like, if you put this guy in a Man-Spider deck list, it is good. Man-Spider was already good, and this guy is a second Fallen one, and you're very happy about that. But if you do something like with Hela, suddenly you end up with people really starting to complain about this. The basic play pattern is actually really straightforward. You do nothing for 5 turns, except play this guy on turn 5, so you have 11 energy, and then with your 11 energy, you play MODOK, and then you play Hela. The way I have built this deck is to allow it to function when you don't do that, which is to say you can play Echo and then Invisible Woman and then MODOK and Hela in that lane, because Echo will prevent people from Cosmoing you, which is the #1 way people will try to interact with your Hela-based game plan if you stick it behind an Invisible Woman. Now remember, you are playing off-curve the entire game. That is the only thing that you are doing with a deck like this. You are trying to do your big endgame combo. This is the kind of thing that I think will get people for a few days before people understand exactly what is going on and exactly what they need to do to beat it. But it is honestly, in my opinion, a real enough deck that you probably should be aware of it. And the sooner we're all aware of it, the sooner that people can actually start dealing with what it can do in a meaningful way. I do think that this deck manages to do a lot of power in a powerful way and illustrates, I think, perhaps the biggest problem with Star-Lord's design, which is that he is so focused on the final turn of the game. And I think this can be a good thing and a bad thing. When you're entirely focused on the final turn of the game, the real thing is, do you make that turn dynamic? Are there interesting things happening? Are people doing cool things with what you enable them to do? And the way Marvel Snap is right now, the answer is overwhelmingly, no, they're doing some dumb combo that just kind of instantly wins them the game. That could be a good thing. It's probably better that those combos are in hand on turn 6, so more people play turn 6, but at the same time, they do make turn 6 feel like it matters less, and people will start retreating when they are able to be in situations against a Star-Lord that looks like it's probably going to Hela you on the final turn of the game. That kind of stuff is super real. And I do think that this is the kind of card that promotes those kind of play patterns. It's possible that this is where what we would describe as the tech-pocalypse really comes to a head. A slightly more fair version of this kind of deck is a high evolutionary-based deck, and you're going to see a lot of these. I feel like they're a pretty decent amount better than you would otherwise expect them to be, in large part thanks to just Fin Fang Foom being a really good, really big card. These decks are not really good at being Evo decks. Like, frankly, there is a point at which we'll start asking, is it okay to take Evo out of here? Because what these decks really are doing is, we're doing Fin Fang Foom things. That is the other space that you'll see this card in a lot. A lot of the decks are going to do Fin Fang Foom things with a couple of ways to duplicate the Star-Lord. In this case, we have Grandmaster, and of course, there is a Silver Surfer First Steps, but you can happily run an Absorbing Man. And basically, the idea is you just want to get as much free energy as you possibly can, and then use that free energy to play as many things that give you more free energy and as many giant big idiots as you possibly can. Very straightforward strategy, and you're gonna see a lot of things in this space as things get refined. You'll notice I am playing a Stardust in here. I think after the first deck we talked about, it's probably pretty easy to understand why, but there's also people who are building these decks to an even more maximal point with things like Leader and Arnim Zola in their top end, and Stardust is weirdly good there as well. Here is an example of maximal mega ramp Star-Lord. It comes from Zenade, and the previous list, the actual first place I saw someone doing something in that space was Dexter, but I think I got something closer to the previous list from Babu in the main Snap Discord, so shout-outs there. I do want to say that this is a very reasonable list if you are willing to invest in just sometimes your deck is going to fall apart. This is a deck that really cares about specific ramp cards, allowing you to do specific ramp things, but at the same time, it is also the kind of deck that is reasonably able to, with all that stupid stuff you're doing, do things that are counterplay to what your opponents are doing in the same space. With things like Leader Zola or Eliath Zola, you can really do a lot of dumb stuff that prevents your opponent's dumb stuff from working. What this deck represents to me is the sort of arms race of Star-Lord decks. I think that this and several other Star-Lord decks are likely more temporal, i.e. they'll be the kind of thing you do right now, but maybe not in the future as people start to refine their strategies against this list. But generally speaking, right now, being the Star-Lord deck that beats the other Star-Lord decks is a viable thing to do, and this deck does have lines in basically every Star-Lord based matchup. If you forced me to tell you on pain of pain that which of these Star-Lord decks would be the ones that stuck around, I would be pretty confident in saying that it's the Man-Spider one. The Man-Spider one does the most points, it does them the most consistently, and it does them the largest amount. And that's really just as far as we get here. Like, I don't know if it's this exact build. Maybe we want to get some more Maverick things going on in here. Maybe we want to get Pixie back in here. But it does a lot of work if you draw Star-Lord. Like, this is the kind of thing where if you get a Star-Lord and you're able to duplicate it, it's very stupid. If you play the card Symbiote Spider-Man and you have Star-Lord, well, you're going to get to 14 energy unless you were playing on curve, which you probably shouldn't have been unless you had a very concrete idea of why that had to happen. If you're going to do it with Fallen One, you're going to get to 13 energy. 13 or 14 energy, well, that is a Man-Spider and a Fin Fang Foom. That is a Fin Fang Foom and a Taskmaster. That is honestly kind of whatever you want it to be. You'll get to 40 points in multiple lanes, and that is enough to win almost every game that you are going to play. This is a very powerful combo deck that does have some notable counters, but those notable counters are not super common just yet, even though they probably should be. This deck is very bad into Cosmo. A lot of Star-Lord stuff is very bad into Cosmo, actually. And frankly, we probably have to talk about that specific face-off more than we talk about basically any other tech card against this guy. If you are worried about this, go play a Show Loud deck with Cosmo in it. You will be fine. Like, all of this stuff is going to fall apart if your opponent gets priority and they put a Cosmo in the lane that your Symbiote Spider-Man is in. your whole deck doesn't work anymore. So all of that stuff is super duper duper real. I do think that Star-Lord is a big upgrade to this archetype. I also think that we have to figure out how to balance Star-Lord with the other energy cheat cards that exist here, because this is definitely the kind of thing that if you draw the Star-Lord, you will pop off beyond belief, but we are much worse at being a Fallen One deck because we lost the Maverick stuff. We are much worse at being a deck that is anything but a Star-Lord deck or a Symbiote Spider-Man deck. So I do think there's probably room to improve here. We lose out on the Pixie. I think that's probably fine, but I do think we probably want to try to build to be a more consistent deck in different spaces, because if we are going to be incredibly vulnerable to Cosmo, which we definitely are without Maverick in here, we end up in a potentially awkward space moving forward. Right now, I don't think it's a huge problem. In the future, I do think it's something the deck is going to have to solve. Just a couple of alt builds on the base version of Star-Lord, which is the sort of Evo-y, mid-rangey, Fin Fang Fumi. Like, that's really what the base Star-Lord is starting to shape up in. It's like Fin Fang Foom and Evo Hulk are like kind of the things you're doing, but it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. Here is Rorum's build, which is just built to do as many points as you possibly can. Here is a large number of points. Here is a bunch of energy. Here are a bunch of ways to distribute points. I have never played a tech card in my life. My tech card is stats. I think that this is actually like kind of nice. I don't think this is like necessarily the wrong way to go about any of this kind of deck building. Like, I think it's a pretty solid build that is very reasonable in terms of here is some output. Your job is to distribute the output. The problem you run into is like, yeah, we have a Luna Snow, but this deck does kind of fall apart when you aren't Star-Lording. It is really built to be a Star-Lord deck, and even though it is capable of doing other things, it's devoting a lot of slots to Star-Lord with Grandmaster and Absorbing Man here, and I think that that balance is going to be what has to be figured out about these sort of smaller Star-Lord decks, is how many slots it's okay to devote and what ability those cards should have to do other things. And the other one we talked about, I had Silver Surfer First Steps and Grandmaster. I think that package is probably a little bit better, but I can't be sure. Another direction you can go is just cut out Evo entirely, because it turns out that, like, right now, basically, if you're playing Evo to get a really big Hulk, well, that means that your opponents are all Star-Lord decks too, and you could just play Red Hulk and not play Evo and get a comparably large man. And I think that's a pretty solid way to go about this. This list comes from Big Baby. The other thing I like in here is the Alioth, because frankly, at this point, there's so much weird BS happening on final turns that you're just happy to have something to throw at it. Like, oh, there's an invisible woman over there. Well, sorry about your backup plan, Hela MODOK deck. It goes away now. That kind of stuff just actually is helpful. I do wonder, again, about the Absman Grandmaster. I like what this deck is doing. The basic premise here is like, let's see if we can get to like 11 energy, Fin Fang Foom Juggernaut, just do something stupid from there. Like, we're going to do stuff the entire game if we can, but like mostly we've got Fin Fang Foom Juggernaut, that's powerful endgame. We've got Red Hulk Juggernaut, that's powerful endgame. We can do things like play the Star-Lord and then, you know, Grandmaster Absman it, like do even more than that. But like the baseline of what we need is Fin Fang Foom Juggernaut, and that should be enough to win games. And that is definitely enough to win games when it pays off. So how good is this guy actually? I think he's a little worse than other people think. Like, I think people are out here acting like he's like mega busted, incredible, amazing. I think he's pretty good. I think that his decks are doing cool stuff. And I think that people are largely not bothering with thinking about how to counterplay him right now. But there are some things that are pretty good against him, like Supergiant and Cosmo. Those kind of counterplay cards are really potent against a card like this. They're really able to disrupt him in a meaningful way, and frankly, you just kind of put a lot of stats on the board while you're disrupting him and get a lot of cool things happening in the form of Negasonics and things of that nature that make this deck pretty awkward when it's not cheating a million energy. There's definitely ways to deal with this guy. I do think he's a lot better than I thought he would be, and I thought he'd be about a 4-star card. He might end up being a little bit better than that, might end up pushing his way up to 4.5. I don't know that he'll push his way up to 5. I had Sholau as a 5-star card. Gut check right now, I would say that Sholau is probably still better than this guy, But I do think that it's worth pointing out that that's like post-nerf show allow, all of that stuff. And I don't think people have really put the effort into trying to disrupt this stuff. It's strong when it works, but it's not nearly as consistent as people seem to think that it is. The Hela stuff, I think, is problematic in the sense that it's just a really awful play pattern. Like, it's just super terrible. At least the people that are doing, like, play this into Grandmaster are doing things where they're like investing in something. The Hela stuff is just skip 4 turns, play this on 5, Modok Hela. I think that sucks. I think that's just a really sucky play pattern. But other than that, I don't really have a lot of complaints about this card. I think he's mostly cool, mostly interesting, and generally a fairly compelling game piece so far. I do think that he raises one important question, though, and it's, how do you want combo decks in Marvel Snap to function? Do you want them to be decks that make people play turn 6, or do you want them to be decks that push people away from playing turn 6? And I realize this is not just a binary thing, because right now, a lot of Star-Lord people are staying into games they shouldn't be staying, and part of whether or not people stay on turn 6 is whether or not you are recognizably doing something powerful, recognizably kind of being the operative word there, not just like whether or not you're doing something powerful, whether your opponent knows you're doing something powerful. So it is a little bit of a moving target in that sense as to whether or not you want your combo deck to be forcing people out on 5 or getting them to stay till 6. I do think that generally speaking, the less on board your combo is, the more likely you're going to get people to stay until 6. And I think you see a lot of that with this guy. His combos are not on board, and so people are staying, even though they definitely shouldn't be, especially in the case of that Hela thing. I don't think that should ever be, like, you should never get stays on that. It should never happen, but it is. And that kind of stuff is notable to me. Like, yes, it is a function of power and design, but it is also a function of people knowing what you're doing. And so I do think that it's a little bit of a moving target. But what I do know is that a lot of good players explicitly prefer when a combo is easy to understand and easy to read, because that makes them feel like their skills are being rewarded. But I'm not actually sure that's good. Here's my pitch for what a good combo is in Marvel Snap, is it doesn't win by too much, and you weren't wrong to stay into it on turn 6. And I think that that's where this guy maybe runs afoul of that stuff, because a lot of what this guy is doing is telling you that you were wrong to even consider staying on turn 6. I think that's the biggest risk that this card is running. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. I will see you in the next one. And there's going to be, at some point in the near future, a Twitch stream that I do that will have a large amount of gifted subs courtesy of Second Dinner. This was supposed to be yesterday, but the Second Dinner credit card got declined or something along those lines. So, broke boy alert. But I will try to let y'all know when that is going to happen if y'all want to stop by. As always, I've been KMBest, you've been phenomenal, and I will see you in the next one.